Welcome everyone to another episode of America's feature series, Space Talks with Z. I'm Z. Hello, welcome. Today we have with us Miranda Satterthwaite of the International Antarctic Center. She is the Academy Director, and we are going to be having a conversation about space education, innovation, and what Earth can teach us about space and what we can bring back to Earth from our technology development and exploration in space. Uh, Miranda has many degrees, but her undergraduate degrees are in psychology and physical sciences and bioscience. She also has graduate degrees in education and business with a focus on international law. Welcome very much, Miranda. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Great, thank you. Great to see you here on a really important time for aerospace and particularly in Antarctica. This year, Antarctica is one of the only continents in the world that's COVID-19 free, and we rely on aerospace to keep our animals looked after well and to make sure the place is secure for the future.
So before we jump into the more detailed discussion, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey to space and the space economy?
So I grew up in the mountains. My father was a director for Porter Heights ski area, and he started the international ski school there. And so I thought everybody spent their time in huts on the mountains in the cold. And when I got to high school and I ski raced, I met people that didn't live in that world. But I continued on after my science degree to go to Europe and trained as a ski instructor in Austria and then coached in the United States and Japan. I worked for a number of tourism operators around the world and also nzski.com in New Zealand. And my specialty area was surviving in extremes and dealing with a lot of people from different nations on really important events internationally. So I guess getting into Antarctica was all the love for the ice and snow, and that I'd studied about extreme environments and extremophiles. My interest in space grew also as I have a house at Lake Tekapo. So I spent my days as a child under the southern stars, looking up and wondering what could be out there and how we could do more with space from New Zealand.
So for those who might not know, the Lake Tekapo Dark Sky Preserve is one of the most pristine sky environments in the world, especially in winter, when you can see the Milky Way rise and set in truly dramatic fashion through just crystal clear skies above a beautiful dark lake with no lights almost anywhere. So you've had a very interesting path from international level athlete to space, and in many ways that's astronaut training, but you've chosen to be focused on education, and you've become a leading voice in the need to use space to create jobs as well as motivate upskilling in the workforce. What are some key needs and benefits from your perspective? And please be direct. What should we be doing? What should governments and industry be thinking about in that regard?
So as I mentioned, a lot of the data that we're getting from the ice at the moment comes from satellites, and we can see a lot of things that are happening right now, irrespective of how humans understand change. For example, we can see the phytoplankton blooming, but it's blooming too early, and the krill, some of them are starving. We can see the ice shelf retreating, and the krill need to live underneath that ice shelf. We can see changes in the animals' numbers. Basically, the whole environment is without a doubt that our planet is changing, and potentially we need to look at other ways of living on this planet, living in deserts, living in the seas, and ultimately we need to look at another place to live, at another planet. And this is really what's been driving me to give students a chance to get the skills to survive on our planet as it changes, but moreover, to get to another planet, to terraform and to live somewhere else, as the place they've been handed from their parents and their grandparents, it seems to be dying.
And to follow up on that, how important is that uh, growth in education and jobs for New Zealand or other similar smaller countries or even possibly developing countries?
Well, we're really lucky in New Zealand that we're surrounded by seas. We can launch rockets into the polar orbit to get data like this, or to look at surveillance data. We've also got a really adaptable legal system. So we're sitting in a unique situation as a gateway to Antarctica, where we can service a time zone that is first across the world's time zone. We can service an area which is, 1/10 of the world is the Antarctic region. And then we can also put together an incredibly strong workforce. We have incredible universities. I've worked for engineering schools both at University of Canterbury and our Institute of Canterbury, and I've seen firsthand how incredible the graduates are from their mechanical engineering, from their electronic engineering, and their electrical engineering schools. So with that, our number 8 wire capacity to invent things really quickly, to be in the right place geographically, and to have innovative capabilities, New Zealand's positioned really well to staff the future Space Force.
So you bring up a variety of good points. New Zealand is clearly taking advantage of its comparative advantage geographically, and due to the fact that it has an excellent educational system. What lessons do you think other countries or other economies could learn from that? With how New Zealand has been revamping its perspective on the space economy?
We're really fortunate as a democracy in an island that we can always trade well with other partners. So we've always had positive relationships with a number of nations, and we have a great education system alongside that. So we're able to collaborate around solving world problems easily. And I think if we're looking at how we're going to move forward as a planet, we need to put scientific invention and solving the planet's issues ahead of our political barriers, that we can go into a high trust model using a well-developed legal system or legal systems, and get past the red tape to hurry up and come up with the solutions quickly. So the consequence of our isolation with a robust legal system means that we're a high trust country to collaborate with and potentially to invest with, to develop tomorrow's technologies for space.
So there's a lot of lessons there for other countries. A robust legal system, a focus on innovation and cutting through red tape. Having been a government contractor for much of my career, I can say that even the US can use a heavy dose of innovation in cutting through red tape. So that's certainly refreshing, in New Zealand to see that. Now, through your work, your writing, and your speaking, you've also become a well-known advocate for the need to explore space technologies for their use on Earth. And you've alluded to that in what you said earlier about we need to learn how to live in deserts, in seas, and in the oceans. Can you elaborate on that topic a little bit for us?
So Antarctica is really similar to the poles on Mars, but we're really fortunate that from Christchurch it's only 5 hours to get to Scott Base. The middle of Antarctica is extremely dry, like a desert. So we can use that area to test out robots for Mars, for example, to test out the subglacial lakes, looking at sensors that go underneath and what sort of microorganisms might live there. For some of the moons, for Saturn, for example, we are testing out robots underneath the ice, on the ice plates. And so what we really got here is a chance to test out things for cold, dry environments, for extreme isolation and the need to send remote technology, for the really high level of radiation required for space, for the need to modularize things and keep things lightweight, because everything is weighed in and out of going to Antarctica. Good place to test for solar energies, for example, and also looking at how we sort of coordinate that remote technology with satellite data that comes over, how we use GPS, for example. So one example of how we've done this would have been a few years ago, we ran a space competition where companies and students had to put together a design for a detection system that you put in front of a vehicle so it can get over Antarctica without falling in the crevasses. Previously, maybe 50 years ago, we used huskies that were super sensitive. We don't have them on the ice anymore. So by using Antarctica as an analog for a space situation like Mars, we managed to get hundreds of applicants in around this competition. So it's an example of how we can use that cold, rocky, volatile, volcanic area in Antarctica to test out for how it could be on the poles on Mars, and then innovate and come up with new products.
So there's a critical lesson there in that, one, look for Earth and look for outer space analogs on Earth, Antarctica, uh, somewhat famously lava fields in Hawaii, critical desert areas, and also possibly certain other areas that offer unique environments. But what's really interesting is that New Zealand structured a challenge around that for universities. So that is a really interesting and innovative way of integrating this, so that you pull the innovation from academia and from industry. What about when we go to space and we develop technologies for there, those technologies being useful for Earth? What examples do you give your students of that?
So we're really interested in the growth of organisms in outer space and how they can be reapplied to life on Earth. So one really good example is the use of hydroponics on the space station. We've created analogs in Antarctica. The German mission has been really successful at this. We also have a number of special hydroponic systems in the Australian Antarctic program. And so there people can grow crops that they won't need to bring in from other countries over a long period of time through the dark in the winter, and make sure that they maintain their physical and mental health through great nutrition. So those are some of the technologies that have been used in the space station we can bring back to Earth, and vice versa. We can test sort of lighting that the organisms grow best. This is going to be really important also for when we look at creating habitats on Mars. We're going to need to possibly live subterranean light forms are going to be needed for growing plants. It's a whole closed energy system that we required. So we're really keen on the use of those space technologies back on Earth when it comes to feeding and even bacterial growth on the space station, looking at how that can be used back here on Earth.
Well, that's remarkable, because particularly with global climate change, eliminating temperate zones somewhat rapidly at different latitudes, being able to farm within a building and vertically could be critical to human survival. Now, with that work, where do you see the future going for the Antarctic Center and the programs you have there? And could you tell us a little bit about the programs you have there and your work as Academy Director?
So over the past year, we've recently entered into a partnership with Science Alive, and we've been gifted all their astronomy assets, for example, their telescopes, their Skywatcher systems, their Skylab, their Star Dome, a number of robots. We're also about to employ some of their staff that are specialised in aerospace. So we've got this structure in place to develop a number of specific programs to do with space training, with Mars being an opportunity to get to eventually, but the key thing is that Antarctica is an analogue for that place, and also an analogue for living on the moon. So the programs that we've already got underway is the Mission to Space program. That's a week-long program which includes astronaut training, robotics, launching rockets, designing rockets, looking at how you would terraform and create habitats to live in, hydroponics, and also we go inside the storm room so you can experience this extreme cold in an astronaut suit. You would also go on the Hagelin so you experience different G-forces. You've also got huskies that are here. We do a whole module about dogs in space and why we have sent them before with rockets. And we've got an incredible gallery which just covers all the features, for example, the balloons in Antarctica that test for ozone. We've got also balloons that are sent up to look at galaxies. We're also looking forward to other modules that we're developing in Antarctic aerospace. We're going to be running Aurora tours over Antarctica where people come here for a couple of hours and then they'll fly out of Christchurch Airport over Antarctica and they'll get to see that Aurora. So that Aurora is really unique for us in the Southern Hemisphere. Of course, it's your oxygen being excited by those electrons through the magnetic field lines, and that oxygen glows that beautiful green you can see behind me. and that's what you would see from the South Pole or from the skies above the South Pole. And the glowing of the orange, that's the nitrogen. So we get to explain that to the guests before they get on the aircraft, and then they'll fly over Antarctica to see those auroras, just as we saw with NASA Sophia flights. And then finally, we're going to be running a Kids in Space program where we send out aerospace experts into schools, and they build rockets and they build astronaut suits and robots, and get a great chance to get a taste for what it's like to be in the pathways into aerospace.
So that's a brilliant mix of education, innovation, and commercialization around space. It's fun. It's funny you mentioned the Sophia flight. On one of the two flights Sophia flights I did out of Christchurch, I was lucky enough to see the aurora, and it was quite just spectacular. Particularly when you're at 45,000 feet, it is just quite amazing, because on the ground it's above you, but when you're up there, it feels like it's all around you somehow. It's very different feeling. And you've been, through your work, you actually years ago hosted, at the time, Associate Administrator Davin Newman of NASA, and that was at a special event for Indigenous peoples and girls in STEM. And so you've worked in that significantly. How would you say the ecosystem is at this point in terms of inclusivity? And what has your journey been as a woman compared to what you've seen other people's journeys being?
I think I was really fortunate to become an alpine skier, because in that world there were equal numbers of competitors, males and females. But when I came back to live in New Zealand, I did notice the dominance of the rugby culture here, and I did notice inequities. So I was really keen to make sure that New Zealanders, our treaty partners, Māori, the Pacifica, and also women got an opportunity to enter the space industry, but also enter the science and technology field. So for that reason, I was, for maybe 4.5 years, as a STEM coordinator at our Institute of Canterbury, an institute that focuses on developing pathways for Pacifica in particular. And also I've run a number of women in STEM projects to help women get into STEM and eventually into the aerospace industry. I think that you get a better team when you have a mixture of different cultures, and also males, females. We've got a range of different ways we define ourselves these days, and the opportunity for people to have a greater skill set in the overall team is harnessed and enhanced by having better gender equity and better racial opportunities for people. So yes, we're really into helping our treaty partners and helping our Pacifica people understand their place in the Pacific, but also in aerospace.
New Zealand is a very interesting nation in its history and its journey to constantly do better. And it's remarkable in that perhaps the indigenous culture is most featured of any nation that was colonized anywhere in the world in New Zealand compared to all others. It's really, as somebody who's not a Kiwi, I found that quite remarkable and admirable. But what would you recommend to others in industry across the world, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in America, and Latin America? What can be done to make the space ecosystem more diverse and more inclusive?
We're really fortunate with the Antarctic Treaty. Although there were 12 countries that are original signatories to the treaty, there are now a number of consultative parties that all agree on how they're going to support each other around science and technology on the ice and protect the native species that live around the Antarctic Circle and on Antarctica. And so in a lot of ways, this treaty, which is governed by COMNAT, which is based in Christchurch, is a model for how we should be working together around not just governance, but around innovation and science for the future of this planet. We're moving to a time where we need to all act as one. If I could have enough courage to say, I believe it is time for scientific democracy. I believe we need to use data-driven decisions and all decide equally around the table about how we're going to govern our planet. And the Antarctic Treaty and the scientific tools we have give an example of how that can operate in 1/10 of the world's most important areas.
Now, to stay on that subject, because that's a really interesting subject, and with your background in international law, you're certainly very well qualified to comment on it. One of our previous guests, Professor Aganaba Janti of Arizona State University, who is one of the leading voices in space law, has talked about how maritime law and the Antarctic Treaty could inform space law and future space treaties. However, others, particularly those in defense and security, are very skeptical because they're concerned about particularly non-democratic nations militarizing space. Most of us would prefer space to be a cooperative arena. What do you think we can do to ensure that space is more resembles the way we've treated Antarctica than say the European powers treated the New World when they fought over colonies?
I think we need to start with the treaty right at the beginning. I think we've got some nations that are already jumping the gun on getting to the moon to figure out what resources are capable. They're the same nations that are not always meeting when they're meant to around treaty issues. So there is going to be, and there currently is, a pattern. So we're better to start with the treaty base, and then obviously you've got the concept of everyone having different vessels going into space. Yes, that's the law of the seas, and potentially everyone having separate bases, then that would be their own base to govern under the law of the seas. But when you've got such a short number of staff actually on the planet, for example, on the moon or on Mars, just for human resource purposes, we're going to need to share the labour pool. And therefore, we're going to need to be governed by a set of regulations that are democratic and are agreed on before we get there. That would be the Antarctic Treaty model.
That's very interesting, and you bring up a really good point that it's a practical consideration. It's not just necessarily a feel-good or a kumbaya consideration. If you've got 50 people from 5 different nations total on the moon, should each nation be sending a doctor, or can you take care of all 50 people with 2 doctors and share that medical resource, for example?
Absolutely. So we run a lot of extreme environment training here, and when we're at full capacity, we've got a husky manager who's Maori. We've got a Sherpa who's from the Himalayas, and he's doing the extreme environment training. We've got myself, and I'm very multinational with family in Europe and the United States. We've got New Zealanders, we've got Chinese, we've got Japanese. When we're at full capacity, and we're all just working together, and our clients might be Indian. So there's no discussion of what nation we're from. At the International Antarctic Center, we're all equal. We all know what we need to do. But when we are at full capacity, we need everybody to work together. And this is what space is going to require. Humanity is at the end of being separatist. It has not worked. We can't even use humanity's sense of voting as an individual and spending so much money on trying to create a democracy when we already have the sensors out there that can tell us what we need to do with the planet. When we go to a new planet, we're going to be dependent on scientific data. We're going to need to use every person's skills. So that means we need to all work under the same set of rules and regulations, share our data, share our knowledge, and work together to a more equitable place.
Well, that's a spectacular point, and one that perhaps not enough people are making, is that if we don't work together out there, we simply may not survive, and certainly our progress as a species will be slowed through competitiveness as opposed to collaboration. If we can collaborate, we can do more and faster. So thank you for those ideas. As we get to the bottom of the hour here, what I also wanted to ask about is Your advice for people who are interested in being part of the space economy, having been in innovation, having been in education, and also having been on the edge of business and government and where they intersect, what would you recommend, or what specific advice would you give to a young person considering a career in space?
So when it comes to intellectual capability, mathematics is really, really important, and so is physics and understanding of the biological sciences. But when I look at what we have to do every day here, and when I think about the astronomers, for example, that winter over on one of the 5 domes in Antarctica to see what's really out there, you need to have incredible capacities in team building and team skills. You need to be able to handle isolation and extreme cold and radiation. And so in a lot of ways, you want to be in your portfolio, you want to make sure you've got some examples of you having survived some extremes. Have you been tramping? Have you been part of a team? Have you showed endurance, resilience? Have you managed to deal with loss and come through at the other side? Have you kayaked somewhere to a long distance? These are the things that we need above being an instant generation. So sometimes communications break out in Antarctica, and you need to be able to be resourceful by yourself in a tent in a storm for up to 3 weeks. That is what we need when we go into space. It's more than being intellectually capable. It's about being emotionally strong and putting others before you. And these are the kind of people we're going to need for space.
Oh, thank you for that. That's amazing. It's not just about the technical education; it's about the personal resilience. And what about people who want to be involved but stay on Earth? What
Oh,
advice might
yes,
you give them, and what jobs can they look at and look
absolutely.
for?
So when I went to Kennedy Space Center and we did the Mars simulation, I'm used to really, really hard training as a skier. There were 4 of us locked into a rocket. We were shot up really fast. It was claustrophobic. And then we had to be weightless, put to sleep, and then landing on Mars. And I landed and I didn't quite get the runway right. And I skidded off the side of the runway. That night I went home, called my sister, who's a doctor in the US, and I said, this is so hard. I can't do this. And it was that moment I realized not everybody is going to go to space. Physically, they're not strong enough to. Psychologically, it can be devastating. Lots of positions, lots of amazing jobs will be here on Earth. Those are going to be at the base stations. Those are going to be picking up the telecommunication signals from outer space. Those are going to be making the superfoods that we can send up to the space station. Those jobs will be about creating clothes for extreme environments. It's going to be really awesome. A great opportunity for people on Earth to look to the stars. And for those few people that get to go, will be supported by a great group of collaborative individuals that believe in the future.
Spectacular. So it sounds like lots of industry will also be resulting on Earth to support that exploration and industry in space. So to now start to think about what are the next steps. What are the next steps for you? What are the next steps for the Antarctic Center beyond, perhaps even beyond the programs that you mentioned? Maybe looking farther out into the future. Can you imagine the International Antarctic Center hosting commercial astronaut camp for a variety of companies, possibly Virgin, um, uh, Tesla, sorry, not Tesla, same owner, SpaceX, um,
Mm,
Blue Origin. Maybe this is where an astronaut academy grows out of for
absolutely.
basic training.
So we've got access to a number of top trainers here. Obviously, I'm still really involved in the alpine ski industry. We have climbing training, we have ski training here, we have extreme environment training just within New Zealand. We also have incredible abilities to look over Antarctica with the gear that we have from here. So getting to the ice will be more difficult because of COVID-19, but New Zealand has very, very low, if not zero COVID rates. So we'd be a really good place for people to come early, have some alpine training, study about extreme environments. This year we have put a new curriculum online with a partner called Science Alive and Education Perfect. We're offering this curriculum out free to all schools. We will start to put the space modules on from the start of January 2021. We would love to have partners in the United States around our extreme environment curriculum to collaborate online, and then ultimately come down here and do week-long space camps where they can ski and zip line and test out astronaut suits and go into a Mars habitat. We've got full blow-up domes for Mars habitats. And we also, as part of the company called Wayfair that owns the Antarctic Center, they also own Cadrona and Treble Cone Mountains. And at Cadrona, they have a Mars analog and vehicles that you can race up and down the mountain and look at the great geology. So it's wonderful opportunities also at night to look at the stars there. So we can run full-on mission to Mars analog camps as well here in New Zealand. We'd love to support anybody that wants to come and be part of space adventures, space learning, and extreme environments.
Well, thank you so much, Miranda, for joining us on Space Talks. This has been really remarkable. We covered a lot of ground, everything from space law to diversity and inclusion, as well as what analogs on Earth exist for the extreme environments in space, and what amazing technologies the space exploration of this century is going to bring back to Earth and help humanity survive and grow and thrive. So again, once more, thank you very much. We were joined today by Miranda Satterthwaite of the International Antarctic Center. She is the Director Academy, running a variety of programs in education, innovation, and training around extreme environments, space, and Antarctica. And we just, thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everyone. Bye.